YOLO Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be taking a look at how reinforcing a spectrum with a sine wave affects our sound. It's actually for this annotation here. This is a video I realized will be pretty helpful in helping you get sort of a familiarity with how these things work. So without further ado, here's Citrus. I'm using Citrus and not Synth1 because Citrus allows me to do two things. So first off, I have two operators, and I can control them much more powerfully and independently in Citrus than I can inside Synth1, and I can offset them by ratios. So if I say play a note out of operator 2 at ratio 2, and I say play the same note out of operator 2 at ratio 2, they will output the same note, except for with the waveform I've given each one. And I can tell one, no, play this one at a ratio 4, and since it's a doubling, it's going to be an octave above. And so now it'll play whatever this waveform is an octave above. So you see and I can tell it specific volume levels for each one. So a pretty easy way to test how we can reinforce our harmonic spectrum. That's why I'm not using Synth1. I also have an instance of Wave Candy so we can see our results. And I've turned oversampling on. So we've got some oversampling. If you want to know about that, go to Digital Audio Basics. And then the series, that is. I also have a Wave Candy, and I've skewed the scale because we care mostly about this lower range anyways. So I've sort of said, hey, make this bigger. And it's also got enhanced frequency, which sometimes pops up with some funny looking things every now and then. But I think it really helps us see what's going on here. So let's go ahead and test some of these things out. So here I've got an oscillator going out, and right now it's just a sine wave at C4. Let's go ahead and change this into a spectrum. I'm going to make it a go-between a saw wave and a triangle wave. We get this. All right, so that's our spectrum we're going to be enhancing. Should be noted, we're only dealing right now with spectrums that remain constant. So you saw none of the frequencies are moving around or anything. They just output amplitude at their various levels. See, they're all the same. There's nothing changing here. So if we were to do a piano, things would be totally different, or trumpet, things just change up. So just so you know, we're going to deal with easy cases right now. We have operator 2. I'm going to change that. That's already a sine wave. And I'm going to output that at a ratio 2. So it's going to output the same note. So basically this is going to add sound to our fundamental. And right now it's in phase with our original signal. They both start at the same point, and so it'll be in phase. They will sum together. And so we will create a resonance point. So as I move this up, let's see what it sounds like. Now you see I have to turn it up pretty far for us to hear. For us to hear it. So we just go, wow. But when we do have it all the way up, it's pretty apparent this thing is creating a resonance. And as a result, frequencies near it, in this case, the nearest harmonics, are being reduced in amplitude while the upper end of our spectrum is left untouched. You'll find this to be the case all the way up the spectrum. If I go to 4, so that's an octave above, versus that. Now notice right here, this doesn't, while we introduce the sine wave here, it almost has more of a filtering effect. When we turn it all the way on, it creates that resonance, because once it actually has to do with masking. Once one frequency exceeds others past a certain threshold of loudness, the others get blocked out, and we actually hear that one. It's actually a psychoacoustic deal. It has to do with how the stereophilia in your ears, the little hairs in your ears, trigger by the basilar membrane to determine what frequency you're hearing more of. And when that occurs, some frequencies will get left out because some hairs on your ear will be triggered way more than others, and it almost basically ignores the other ones. Your mind does, that is. So there's this whole second story. But basically we notice there's a resonance point, makes the other harmonics around it weaker. But if we reduce it in volume, it can be used to sort of just add a little bit of flair at a particular moment. In this case, it's not really flair. This is more of just an annoying tone. But we're making observations here. Let's go up one more octave. So you can notice we can hear the low end still pretty well, but anything up around that tone is pretty much annihilated because this tone is so dang loud. So when we set things, we want to find the sweet spot in the middle. Now, what if we did something that's unrelated to our fundamental? Well, then we're going to emphasize an interval. And I don't want to get too music theory on you, but the third harmonic, so a ratio 3, right? That's gonna bring up. Actually, I'm not so sure on the ratio 3 thing. It'd be 3 times the fund. Yeah, so it should be. So with a ratio 3, we should get a fifth away from an octave plus a fifth away from the harmonic. So we should be emphasizing a perfect fifth. Yep, that's a fifth. So I'm still at the beginning stages of some of my interval training. But anyways, we are now emphasizing intervals, harmonies. And so when it's just 2 notes and one is blatantly emphasized like this, they sound more like separate notes than anything. But if I were to play different, so if I leave the spectrum, moving notes around, all of a sudden our ear sort of puts it into one category because it says, oh, these are part of the same sound. We've been introducing it sort of as a separate sound. So if I were to go like to the octave again, versus this, if I got rid of it. So you see, we get super different oral effects. We got to have the sound running around those to really make sense of it. Now, if I go 1 down, we get that. And that one doesn't sound like it's overpowering. In fact, it sounds like it's got a supporting role. Now, sometimes this is an issue because when it does that, we can sometimes have problems with muddiness and other things. But if I were to play this, we can also toss phase cancellation into the mix. So if our first harmonic is resonating, and right now it's going up, well, let's say we move it down. So now, let's maybe not that down, like that down, right? Now our wave is going down while our first wave is going up. So when they get added together, they are going to cancel a little bit. And so we can move this around the spectrum and cancel out parts of the spectrum and sort of create these holes. And there's a whole ideas about this, but right now we're dealing with the most simple versions. And so if I were to toss this in my spectrum as a layer, that's why when we introduce a set of harmonics, we are introducing some degree of phase cancellation throughout the entire spectrum. So here we've got that. So I'm going to go ahead and here's it without it. Now let's introduce it. And let's also introduce it at the same harmonic. That way the phase cancellation happens at the fundamental. Now check out if I put it back. We get that boomy tone. But if I just do a small little phase adjustment, that sounds completely different. And if we were to play with this, that is a pretty big deal. If I were to just move the phase back so they both start in the same spot. So now this one's adding with this one. Completely different. So phase is a really big deal. Now, I want to point out something. It just occurred to me. So this is sort of moment of inspiration. If we go to an isotope EQ, let's just go to ozone. Why heck do I have so much of the same plugin? Okay, ozone. I want the equalizer, man. That's all I want. There we go. Here's an equalizer by ozone. Ozone equalizer. I'm not sure about the other ones. I didn't check. They have these options to show you the phase delay and phase response. Now, this is like way more advanced, but I just want to point it out. When I move a filter, I get these extra curves. These curves are showing me what is happening to the frequencies at this area. And so we notice there's a phase delay and a phase response. Phase response is purple. Phase delay is blue. And if I make this more or less severe, the curves will change, especially like the low pass is like the most noticeable. And so we see like, what the heck does this mean? We'll approach stuff like this later, but I just want to point out whenever you run your stuff through this sort of stuff that we're doing by hand right here will totally happen to your sound through here. And Isotope just has a lovely way of just showing you exactly what would happen. And so we'll talk about like what does it mean later. But right now we actually kind of are learning what it means. Because where did I put that plugin on? What channel? I don't know. But we're kind of learning what that means right now. So, okay, we've got a sine wave and it's causing this phase cancellation. We just learned that this is like, oh, this is pretty crazy stuff, man, pretty intense. So we also have these other waveforms. We can pick from a triangle wave, and we can actually convert these to sine harmonics. So if you didn't pick up on it, I didn't make it painfully clear, but these bottom rows control the phase offset of each individual frequency, and these upper ones control the amplitude of the frequency, and then these little bars are each harmonic. So it doesn't like let us pick individual middle harmonics. If you want to do crap like that, you can go into Harmor and do some pretty wild things. So, okay, this is what we got going for us. Now let's think about what happens if we introduce a triangle wave. So let's select triangle and let's see its pattern. We see we got the first harmonic, and then we're getting every other frequency. So this is the first, third, fifth, and so we notice, oh, these are odd frequencies, and we got this interesting phase relationship going down. The saw wave is every single one. So say, wow, and they're all phase aligned, so they'll all sum together. One of the reasons why saw waves are so dang loud. And then we could talk about other like the Gibbs effect and stuff, but we're gonna leave that out. That's unrelated. And then we have the square wave, which are odd harmonics, but we notice these harmonics are also phase aligned, so it's also going to be really loud. And because they're all going to sum, the triangle wave's got some degree of cancellation. And also we notice that they are much louder. That also occurs too. So if we go to the triangle wave and look at that, they are like, so we've been layering in these sine waves that say, look, there's this resonance boost, but if we change the phase, we get a totally different effect. Now, and so this is like one of the basic ideas of layering is having an intuitive design. So if we put in something, it's in phase, we're going to get a little bit of masking and some boominess, which could be a good thing, especially if we're moving that frequency around in our spectrum. A lot of frequency knobs have resonance controls. Otherwise, we also have the ability to do this phase shift. With a lot of filters also introduce phase shifts. And so we get these variations and sound to our sound. So when we're layering things, we can do things like, well, instead of layering it with a sine wave, because that's kind of boring, I am going to layer it with a triangle wave. So I'm going to introduce me some odd harmonics, and they're going to be kind of weak, but they'll sort of soften the blow of our fundamental, especially if it's in phase. And check it out. We will hear sort of a crispness happening in the first couple of harmonics. Because if we look at this, the first harmonics are the loudest ones. After this is like, it almost doesn't matter at all. But they're important for the shape of the wave, which is really important in FM. So let's go ahead. These are the most of the action happens here. This is all sort of just like detail work here. Like, good job for being so detailed. So let's put this in our sound. We notice a similar boominess occurs, but if we went to just a sine wave, come on, it's just a sine wave. That is like a billion times more boomy than if we were to go to a triangle wave. We also get this sort of upper harmonic stuff. So I want to point out to you something that's kind of interesting. So now we're introducing things at the odd harmonics. If we were to do this at the octave 4, listen to the result. Now, we get a lot of interesting stuff happens in the upper harmonics. You would sort of expect a similar offset to occur up the spectrum, but because frequency is logarithmic, we have an offset. We've got this is now filling in holes that wouldn't exist down there. So let's just pretend that let's just make this a saw wave, right? So this is a saw wave. Well, the saw wave's got frequencies at an octave, and then the next one's a fifth away, and then the next one's a fourth away, and then I believe the next one's a third away, so on and so forth, infinitely up the spectrum at these various ranges. It's an overtone spectrum. Well, if you shift our layer up one octave, well, it's going to have its pattern imposed on it, but now it's going to occur sort of strangely, right? Because our first layer will have a fundamental plus an octave, and then at that octave, though, is where our next layer starts. So its fundamentals, its loudest frequency is going to be there. And so this unusual placement is going to occur on the second harmonic of our first layer. And now the third harmonic of our first layer is going to have a fifth away, right? Well, our second, I hope this is making sense. So the third harmonic is going to be a fifth away, but this is still only on its second harmonic. So that one, now in this case, is a triangle wave. But if let's say it's following a saw wave is 2, If this was also a saw wave, then that means that this next harmonic would be an octave away. So we get this, things don't line up. So when we do things an octave apart, the harmonic structure, the upper area of our spectrum is totally like blown apart in all these interesting ways. It's what makes layers so dynamic. And then on top of it, we've got all these phase relationships going everywhere, going up the spectrum. Like, just listen to that. So, okay, that's what we have going on here. Let's try something else. Let's try mixing. Let's go to a triangle wave, and let's reduce this. Now remember, we really should be playing around with the layers as sounds because our brain is hearing all the pieces separately. But when we play with a sound, we're going to perceive it completely differently because our brain will go, oh, these are part of the same thing. And suddenly you'll hear, it's like the individuality of every frequency just sort of goes away. If you train yourself, you're actually going to be able to pick it apart in your head even while playing. It's not that distracting, I don't think, because you really have to work pretty hard. Like, I can do it pretty okay. And I've even got to the point where, like, if you just go like, ooh, if you change just the shape of your mouth while creating the exact same sound, you'll hear how your mouth affects the sound of your voice. And it's actually kind of fun to listen to other people. And instead of listening to what they're saying, you listen to the way their mouth is filtering what they're saying. And it's totally trippy. So if I just go and move my mouth in and out while I go, ooh, we'll get that ooh, and you'll find that like these, I didn't do it completely accurately. I changed a couple other things, but you kind of have to focus. But you get these really interesting, you notice that certain harmonics disappear. It's really crazy. Like, I spent way too much time just making ooh sounds and listening to how my mouth affects it. It's the same thing as if when I'm in class, if the teacher's talking there and then they slightly turn their head. If you might not notice this, but when I was taking acoustics, it's a huge distraction. They would turn their head and they'd be talking, and there's the sound of their voice completely changed in the room. And I was made aware of this through my acoustics class. I was more aware in general of acoustics, and I became fascinated with how good we could tell where things were based on like simply how their head was turned. Or if I turned my head and listened, oh man, it blew me away. So it's a really interesting thing. I don't know. Maybe I'm weird for all this stuff. But basically, let's go ahead. Let's do a couple more layer examples. This has gone in some directions I didn't anticipate talking about, but I think they're really interesting things to share with people. Now let's go ahead and let's give this thing a saw wave series. And we are going to let's give this a triangle. So here's a triangle wave. Reminds you of like Mario or something. And now let's go ahead and layer in a square wave. No, let's layer in a saw wave. So what we would expect to happen, right, is this is every harmonic, as we saw earlier. This is going to phase cancel up the spectrum. So even if we boost it, we wouldn't expect our fundamental to become boomy in any way like it was before. And let's put them to start at the same fundamental. And we would expect the odd harmonics to receive a little more juice, causing this masking to occur up the spectrum, but it won't sound as hollow. It'll actually sound a little more bright and crisp because we've got these even harmonics there. And even harmonics and odd harmonics have this interesting deal. Odd harmonic distortion, it tends to be more noticeable because it emphasizes a different fundamental relationship to the fundamental, a different elementary relationship to the fundamental, because it's confusing if I use fundamental twice. So I don't want to delve into that because that's like, we could talk about tonality and all sorts of things. If you're interested in a book that sort of delves into this, it's called The Lydian Chromatic Concept. But you got to know, you got to be really okay with tonal harmony and modes and stuff if you want to be able to read that book and understand what it's saying. So, but he actually calls upon these ideas a little bit. So anyways, let's hear the sound, right? So we should expect to hear that as a result. So here's our triangle wave. Now let's turn in our saw wave. Now, if I leave it just a little under, we hear there's sort of this, it feels like there's this hollowness. That's the phase cancellation. Phasers will create this as a moving tension. We'll hear this as it goes up the spectrum. But we're not talking about phasers today. If I bring up my saw wave, it'll eventually, the even harmonics will gain so much volume that the accumulation at the odd harmonics will be less, it'll be almost negligible because masking is occurring. But because the odd harmonics are summing with our saw wave, we could still pretty easily tell the triangle wave is in there. If we were to cause a small phase shift here, they're not going to sum nearly as nicely, and we would expect the triangle wave to disappear a little bit more. Now we can still hear the fundamental pretty easily. So the fundamental is going to be like a whole nother story with a waveform like this. But if we can always look at it as, well, this is a sine wave and that's a sine wave. So if you move it about halfway, it should disappear mostly. And now it's as if the triangle wave almost isn't there at all. So let's go ahead. Let's bring this back. So hopefully some of these layering now you're going like, wow, this is I sort of understand what I can expect if I put down some layers together. So right there, that sounds kind of strange, but if I were to then start playing notes, you hear the two pieces separately, but now pretty interesting stuff. Now, if we were to go down an octave, now we got to consider all these additional moves. So I don't sit here and go through this. Like I do sort of go through a lot of this in my head, just like that. Like you just get good at thinking about it. So it does become a little more natural, but there are things to take into consideration. And when you're doing sound design, being able to pinpoint like exactly where problems are is a really big help. So this became an awful lot more. And like, check that out. That's a cool texture. We're actually going to be talking about missing fundamentals and stuff in this lesson because we're actually dealing with textures that are created by that. Only this time they're generated through phase cancellation. So that's that. If you have any questions about this stuff, let me know. I could talk a lot more about a lot more examples. The problem is I risk becoming a little boring. This was supposed to be just an auxiliary video just to show you like, oh, look what happens when we put a sine wave here. And I notice, oh, there's resonance and masking, but there's like way more that goes on. And when we introduce saw waves and harmonic series into this, it becomes way more intense. And we'll be delving into these things and doing examples with these. So this is just our basic video, basic observations of what's happening. It's friggin' insane and incredible. And there's actually quite a bit of music theory that can get tossed up in here that I don't want to take the time and go into completely right now, because then I think most of my viewers at this point, most of you guys don't have the theory background on chords and stuff to perhaps handle it. I know some of you guys out there definitely have the chops. You definitely would be able to take on, you might even know more than me on this stuff. You probably do way more about some of this stuff, but it's really interesting. Drop your comments down below, support me on Patreon, subscribe, and have a blessed day.